I got very irritated by the notion that Greece was somehow different from France, from Italy, even from Germany. So I began to look at information that might suggest that there is a deeper systemic at work, where Greece is the extreme example in terms of economic losses, and where Germany is the extreme example in terms of recovery. If you look at the data, all countries in Europe shared a certain fall. They go up a bit. Most countries begin to decline. Greece falls very severely, but France, Italy, Netherlands, they all decline. They go up and then they decline. Germany goes up. Why does Germany go up? Because it is at the heart of that economy is intermediate manufacturing, machines that make machines. The whole world needs machines that make machines. Secondly, they still have traditional banks, community banks. So that's one extreme. Why does Greece go under? Greece goes under in a history that begins in a very sharp form with the Olympics. A lot of citizens' money was deployed to build a lot of, in the long term, if I may say so, useless facilities. Who made money? The state lost money. The citizens lost money. Who made money? The construction companies, the investors, etc. They left after the Olympics were done or built, and the government inherited a massive debt that it never recovered from. To think that the crisis of Greece starts now because there isn't enough austerity is simply a mistake. I mean, if you look at the data, you have to take a certain term. So I would say that when we look at Greece today, we have a second hard-hitting negative, and that is austerity politics. The Greek has paid, the Greek people, the Greek government have paid billions of euros to banks. So what we have is a massive extraction of citizens' money, which is government money, leaving Greece, going to very rich banks. How could any country do well with those two whammies? The investors during the Olympics, and now the fact that all the money that the Greek government has kept paying, all of it has left Greece and gone to the banks. That is really the story for me. And I make a very strong argument in my book, Expulsions, that if you look at the programs that were instituted by the IMF and the World Bank in the 1980s in the Global South, they called it restructuring. You need to restructure your economy. Well, the language of restructuring, it was disastrous, by the way, for those economies, but the language of restructuring comes with a very different umph, and it would not have worked in Europe. Who's going to tell the French, restructure your economy? But they can ask austerity, save, cut where you... So there are these strong, one is the voice of power, restructure your economy. Austerity is the deceptive voice of a kind of fake solidarity. And so these are both modes that wind up with very similar results, though the economies are very different, of course, and they're both very, very partial. So I think, I have a problem with austerity politics. And I ask myself, does the language of migration still capture the fact of these ships crossing the Mediterranean with lots of people dying very often? They all need rescuing. They can be floating does it capture the 7,000 plus who were floating in the Andaman Sea of Indonesia, Malaysia, you know what I'm talking about, for up to 2 months? What are we seeing? This is not migration. This is not even refugee flows. This is something else. And at that point, when you then sort of bring in another element, which is the the degrading of the subject that is the migrant. We humans, we started migrating since we emerged. We could not have survived without migrating. It's a foundational element, whether we call it high-level professionals or whether we call it migrants. So, and now this sort of the militarizing of control over migrants. I think we have entered a new epoch, and it fits a bit with my expulsions. This is so extreme. So yes, you have, on the one hand, more and more circulation of professionals. There are more and more regimes that protect high-level professionals. There are still migrations happening all over the world, really. And then there is something else. Again, the familiar that becomes so extreme that we can no longer capture it with our existing categories. So I say those 7,000 who floated in the Andaman Sea and 3,500 are estimated to still be floating, they have nothing. They have only their own urine to drink. That's all they have. And they die bit by bits and pieces, 3 less and then 10 go. That's not migration. When I then bring in expulsions, I bring in another dimension. It's the extreme condition that we somehow lose with our existing measures and our existing ways of seeing. So when the simplest example is probably the very, very, very long-term unemployed, those who have not had a job in 10 years, is it really helpful to call them unemployed? Something else has happened to them. When the subprime mortgage, 15 million households in the US thrown out of their homes. In Germany, every year, the last few years, starting in 2007, 91,000 households, 98,000, every time that is between 200,000 and 300,000 people thrown out. All of these extreme conditions become invisible to our existing categories, to our existing concepts. So I say that's beyond inequality. These are expulsions. And there's a kind of systemic edge, multiple systemic edges, where the familiar condition, the familiar, not the monster, not the horror that, the familiar, becomes so extreme that we lose it statistically, conceptually, invisible. Look at Athens, beautiful city. I only saw beauty today, and prosperity on the way from the airport to here. I know that your government and experts have counted at least 1 million people who are absolutely destitute, and they're invisible. We're gradually expelling them. With Greece too, this is not just between the people and the government. There is that third powerful presence, the IMF, the European Central Bank, the financial head of the European Union, and Mr. Schäuble always seems to be in there too. So, this is a triangulation that allows those others to make very, very strong decisions. They don't lose anything. They just don't. It's not like your politician who you can vote out. They just don't. They function like pure bureaucrats, even when they're not really. I mean, Madame Lagarde is not a bureaucrat, yeah? But Draghi is not a bureaucrat. But as a system that wants to handle the Greek case, it becomes a kind of bureaucratic intermediary that can do whatever they think is best. In this moment, they really think that austerity politics is the answer, because what are they going to lose? They have just set their mind on austerity, and that's it. I loved it when Schäuble said, when Tsipras first says we are not, takes a strong decision, Madame Lagarde says, first short sentence, very good sentence, she says, we're going to work with Greece. Carney, head of the UK Central Bank, one of the most powerful in the world, says, and we never heard that phrase again. I think he was told not to. European austerity has failed. He said that. And never again was that phrase mentioned. And then there was Mr. Schäuble, who said, contracts are contracts and we don't break contracts. Contracts are contracts. On and on. Well, I was so tempted, if I could have, to mention to Mr. Schäuble that in 2001, the IMF and the World Bank canceled 46 countries' debt obligations because it recognized these countries will never be able to pay the debt. 46 sovereign governments were told, okay, you know what, we're going to give you a break. And they called that the hyper-indebted poor countries. And they lowered this, they forgave debt, etc. So yes, the international system has done that. And that was a grand example. 46 countries, that's a lot of countries. Look at the Mediterranean region on this side. Athens is one of the few reasonable cities left. Damascus is out, Beirut is in trouble, Amman, Cairo is in trouble, North Africa is a mess. There is Istanbul, there is Athens. There is value here. What I've tried to show to you is that Greece is part of a pattern that in many diverse ways is affecting vast stretches of a people